A few people have said to me they have some cards from the Wilds of Eldraine set. I don't know what to do with them yet, so I thought it's about time I update my budget deck lists. So here's 6 other budget decks you can use that use cards from the Wilds of Eldraine, also with some cards that you might have already from previous sets. So stick around to see what we have in these 6 new budget decks. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on any future videos like this. Okay, we're going to get into our 6 budget decks here, which are including, like I said, cards from Wilds of Eldraine, but also older cards that you might have, maybe a way of upgrading some other budget decks you have. We also have optional upgrades in these decks, so the limit I'm sticking to is up to 10 rares or mythics in a deck. Some of the decks have none at all, but they do all have optional upgrades, so extra rares or mythics you could add if you have them or if you want to craft them. But I'm going to stick to my wildcard rules of only craft things that you think you're going to get lots of use out of. I wouldn't craft a card that's only good in one deck if you don't think you're going to get much use out of it. So yeah, cards that are the most versatile, usable in different decks, ones that are going to be around the longest, will be the best ones to spend your wildcards on. So some of these decks might work out better for you than others, and they all have all kinds of different strategies, from killing the opponent in the first few turns, building up ramping into big creatures, more control-y strategies, or ones that just draw insane amounts of cards. So we have all kinds of different things. We're just going to get into it now. So yeah, hope you enjoy these budget decks. And we're going to start things off with the first deck, which is the new budget mono red deck, aggro deck, obviously, because that's what we do with mono red these days in standard. So we've got the basic elements of a normal mono red aggro deck. We've got Kumano faces Carcassonne. We have Monastery, Swift Spear, Phoenix Chick, Play with Fire, Lightning Strike. Those things are all normal. Let's move them over there. So these are all the normal ones you'll have in pretty much any mono red aggro deck. We also have the idea of doing combat tricks. This is basically the premise behind this mono red aggro deck is we're going to try to use Kendra Spell Spear. So it's an uncommon 2/2 with trample and prowess. We can transform it for 3 mana if we pay a bit of life, because we don't have blue mana to pay the transform cost. It becomes a 3/3 with trample, ward 2, prowess. So the prowess triggers will happen twice. So anytime we cast an instant or sorcery, this will get +2/+2. So it's going to get really big, really quickly. Ward 2, so it's slightly hard to deal with, and trample, so it doesn't matter if they block. So we want to basically push through lots of damage with the Spell Spear if we can. And we've got Blazing Crescendo to help us do that, because the creature will gain +3/+1 till end of turn. And it also helps us grab another card from the top of our library, exile it, and we can play it up until the end of our next turn. So a bit of card advantage as well. And quite often, we'll be able to use something like Twinferno to either copy a spell like that. So that will mean Blazing Crescendo will give something +6/+2, and we'll exile 2 cards off the top of our library. Or we can just give Double Strike to a really, really beefed up Spell Spear, and quite often that gets to finish the game by itself. But we do have some other cards, some other new cards from Wilds of Eldraine that are going to help us do these things as well. We have Monstrous Rage, which is like the best combat trick ever. It basically gives +2/+0 till end of turn and creates a monster roll token, which in itself gives +1/+1 and trample. This is +3/+1 and trample for 1 mana, and +1/+1 stays, and trample stays permanently as well. So that's a great thing to put on a Swift Spear in particular, because they really need trample, or even just a Kumano to give that trample, or a Phoenix Chick to help that do extra damage each turn, considering it probably can't be blocked a lot of the time. So that's what we can do with Monstrous Rage. We've also got Twisted Fealty, and this is our kind of last resort spell. We gain control of a creature the opponent controls. We untap it, we give it haste, and then we get to attack with that creature as well. If they play out something huge like an Atali or an Atraxa, or even a Shield Red, anything that's big that we can't really attack through, we can gain control of it, we can attack with it, and we can add a Wicked Roll token onto one creature as well. We could put that on a Phoenix Chick as well. We could put that on a Commander. We could put it on anything at all. But that's one way we're going to get past the really big things the opponent has, like their Atraxas. And then we have Witch Stalker Frenzy, which is a really good, not really a combat trick, but it is kind of a combat trick because it costs 4 to do 5 damage, which is okay. But it costs 1 less for each creature that attacked this turn. So we can use it while attacking, or we can use it after attacking, if that makes any difference, if that's any better. And that should, in theory, get that last bit of damage done that we need to do to finish off the opponent before they get to do their cool things as well. We've got 20 lands in the deck, which isn't very many, but it should be enough considering most of our things here cost 1. Yeah, all this costs 1. These cost 2, and in theory, this is 3 and this is 4. But this is probably more likely to be a 1 or a 2 anyway. So pretty much everything is a 1 or a 2. So 20 mountains should be enough for this deck. Now the upgrades, the potential upgrades for this deck would be maybe something like a Charming Scoundrel from the new set from Eldraine, which is pretty much an upgrade on the Bloodthirsty Adversary, because this can come in as a 2/2 haste, but it can also do other things. It can discard and draw if you need to, or it can create a treasure token if you need extra mana for your next turn, or it can make, the Wicked Roll, which makes it into a 2/2, or makes something else into a bigger creature. Can put the Wicked Roll token on something else, which is also extra damage when that thing dies. So, generally slightly better than the Bloodthirsty Adversary. We've got Feldon, who works really well in mono red anyway, so obviously a good one to add in, but it's also rare. We've got the Raging Battle Mouse, 2 mana 2/1, which allows us to trigger Celebration easier, because the second spell we cast each turn costs 1 less to cast. Now, a lot of the things we have here only cost 1 anyway, and it's 1 red, so we can't reduce the cost of that. And these are non-legendary, so if we have more than one Raging Battle Mouse out, then all our spells are going to be cheaper, but generally we have cheap spells anyway. It's going to help us to trigger Celebration and make it a little bit cheaper. The main reason we want to trigger Celebration is having Godric, which is probably my new favorite mono red card in the set, because not only is it a 3/3 haste, which is okay, good as it is, if we have Celebration, if we have 2 or more non-land permanents entering the battlefield under our control this turn, it's not a 3/3 human, it's a 4/4 dragon that can fire breathe or pay red to give all dragons you control +1 power until end of turn as many times as you want. You might not have other dragons in the deck, but if you do, it's going to benefit those as well. And one way we can help to trigger Celebration is by having things like those roll tokens come into the battlefield as well. So Twisted Fealty creates a Wicked Roll, and then we've also got Monstrous Rage, triggers or creates a monster roll token. Even Kumano flipping over and becoming creature on its 3rd chapter is another non-land permanent entering the battlefield. So that also triggers Godric. So there's lots of things we can do to trigger it and push through lots of damage that the opponent probably isn't ready to block a 4/4 flyer out of nowhere on turn like 3 or 4. So that's really, really powerful. And then obviously lands we can always upgrade. We've got Serkensen, which can trigger Celebration by itself because it can create 2 1/1 spirit creature tokens. And there's literally no downside to having one of these in your deck. If you have more than one, because they're legendary, you can have a problem where one's kind of redundant. Having at least one, if you have it, is definitely going to improve on the slight chance you need it. It's always there. And then we've got Mishra's Foundry, which is a really good way of doing extra damage to the opponent because you can turn it into a creature and attack. The only downside is because it only taps for colorless mana, means that we can't use it to cast more than one single like red mana spells. So having 1 in the deck is probably fine. Having 2 is getting slightly risky. More than 2, you're probably going to have a couple of times when you can't cast something because it doesn't tap for red. So that's the basics of this mono red budget-friendly deck, an artisan deck, because there are no rares at all in this basic build over here. Obviously, if you have the rares, if you want to upgrade a little bit more, maybe replace some things in the deck with these other rare creatures, they're going to help you do a lot more damage pretty quickly. Moving on to our second budget deck is the Budget Auras deck. So this is pretty much the standard enchantment deck, but with a few changes to make it a bit more budget friendly and using some of the new cards from Eldraine as well. So the basic idea of this deck is getting Calyx out. He's a mythic and he's only really good in enchantment decks, but the enchantment decks are really good right now. So if you have him, use him. If you have the mythics to craft him, I think you're going to get quite a bit of use out of him. He's going to be around until like September 2025. So he's around for a while. But we want to get Calyx out, and then we want to do damage to the opponent with him or with another enchanted creature to copy enchantments we have. We can also add +1 counters on our creatures whenever enchantments enter the battlefield. So the standard enchantment deck, the cards we have here that are from the standard kind of enchantment deck are Audacity, we have Generous Visitor, we have Ossification, Spirited Companion, and Jukai Naturalist. They're all the kind of normal cards you might see. Also have Seal from Existence, which is better in a deck when you have fewer basic lands, because if you have Ossification, you need to have a basic land to be able to cast it. You only have lots of 2-color lands, which work well in this deck. Ossification becomes a little bit worse. And because Ossification can only hit creatures and planeswalkers, and Seal from Existence can hit any non-land permanent and has Ward 3, there's quite a few times when Seal from Existence is going to actually be better for you. And the other older card we have in the deck is Catilda Dawnheart Martyr, which is a legendary creature, flying lifelink, protection from vampires, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of permanents we control that are spirits and or enchantments. And we have a lot of enchantments, and some of our creatures are also spirits, like the Generous Visitor. So Catilda tends to be pretty big. It's lifelink, it's flying, which makes it a bit evasive. And when it dies, it goes to the graveyard and can be cast again for the disturb cost of 5 to become an aura, enchant something else, and give all those abilities to something else. So it's quite resilient, and it can help finish off games by itself pretty well. So the new cards that we've added to this deck, starting with Tanglespan Lookout. It's not an enchantment, it's not a spirit, but 3 mana for a 2/3 creature that whenever an aura enters the battlefield under our control, we get to draw a card. And we have lots of auras in this deck. We have Audacity, we have Royal Treatment, which is an instant which makes us hexproof, makes our creature hexproof, and creates a Royal Roll token, which gives it +1/+1 and Ward 1, which is an enchantment entering the battlefield. We have Ossification, which is an aura, and we have Catilda, when we cast for the disturb cost from the graveyard, is an aura. And we've got Ferocious Werefox, which is the other new card, which we can cast. It's instant adventure, guard change for 2 mana to create a monster roll token attached to one of our creatures, gives it +1/+1 and trample, which is an aura entering the battlefield. Or if we need it, we have 4 mana creature, which is a trample 4/3, which is not too bad either. So actually, we do have it here for the creature, but we kind of have it here more for the instant to create an aura, so it's kind of down here. So the mana curve is still pretty low, 1s, 2s, and 3s. And the Seal from Existence and the Calyx get a discount from the Jukai Naturalist as well. So everything kind of moves down a little bit more. So we don't need that many lands in this deck. We have 22 at the moment, and we're using up our rare budget on having a couple of different 2-color lands. But if you do have more 2-color green and white lands, then they're going to help make this deck even better. So the great thing about the Royal Treatment, the Royal Roll token, and the Monster token, which comes from the Werefox, is that we can attack with maybe a Spirited Companion. The opponent doesn't block because it's just a 1/1, and then we can put a Royal Roll or a Monster Roll onto the Companion if we have Calyx out, and then the Companion's going to hit, do its damage. Calyx will copy an enchantment, so it depends what we have out. We might have a Seal from Existence we want to copy, or we might have on Audacity we want to copy another aura entering the battlefield, triggers Tanglespan Lookout again. We might draw extra cards as well, or we can copy the Spirited Companion or the Jukai Naturalist if we want some more lifelink. There's loads of different things we can do when we hit with an enchanted creature, and the opponent might not be blocking like a 1/1 if it's attacking, but giving it that enchanted status with the Royal token or the Monster token going to help us do some surprises with Calyx. There's a couple of things we have to be aware of with this deck. Now, the Tanglespan Lookout can draw a card anytime an aura enters. It's not just once per turn, which Takashi's Welcome is, like whenever a creature enters, draw a card, its mana value is 3 or less. But only happens once per turn. So this can happen more often. It's a little bit easier to kill, as it's just a 2/3. As a creature, it's not so easy to get rid of Takashi's Welcome. But yeah, it's going to happen more than once per turn. It can happen on your turn and the opponent's turn as well, because we can bring these enchantments into the battlefield at instant speed as well. We are missing the Kami of Transience from this deck at the moment, partially because it's a rare, but also because it also only triggers its +1 counter when you cast an enchantment spell. And although we do have lots of them here, don't have quite as many, like replacing Takashi's Welcome with Tanglespan Lookout means we're casting fewer enchantments. But it is still a really good creature to include if you can. And so in our kind of optional upgrades here, we still have Kami of Transience. You can include it if you want, because it's still a really good threat that grows really quickly, has trample naturally, and can return from the graveyard whenever other enchantments enter the graveyard from the battlefield. So it's still a really good creature to include if you have it. And then we've got Takashi's Welcome as well. Now, it might be good to have this and maybe Tanglespan Lookout, because you're still going to be drawing extra cards, but Takashi's Welcome is harder to get rid of. And it triggers whenever one or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield. And pretty much all of our creatures are mana value 3 or less, with the exception of the Werefox. Apart from that, all the other creatures are going to generate cards for us, so it's definitely a good one to include in the deck. And then the other main things you want to improve in this deck is maybe other rare lands, so Iganjo and Boseiju, both really good in this deck. And then obviously more 2-color green and white lands. As many of them as we can get in, generally a good thing. Brush lands do damage to us, but we do have life gain in there as well. So it's not too much of a problem. You just really want to be able to cast these things as early as possible, kind of curve out and get a huge advantage as quickly as we can. So if we copy enough Seals from Existence and get rid of all the opponent's things, boost a lot of damage with Audacity and +1 counters from Calyx, or get Catilda out in the air, which tends to be a pretty strong creature, the opponent gives up relatively quickly with this one. So yeah, really fun deck to play. And this version currently has 10 rares in it, because we've got 4 Calyx, 2 Catilda, and then just the other lands. But everything else is common or uncommon. So relatively budget-friendly deck. So try that one out if you want to try enchantments. Hey, then we're going to move on to Faeries from Eldraine. This is the budget Faeries deck. And the general idea of this deck is get as many flying fairies into the air as possible, doing their little bits of damage, growing. And it's kind of a control-y build as well, because we've got lots of fairy synergy, instants, and sorceries. So we've got the Ego Drain, which is taking a card out of the opponent's hand and discarding it. We have to exile one from our hand if we don't control a fairy, so ideally we have a fairy as early as possible, which might be the Fairy Dream Thief, because it's only a 1 mana 1/1 creature. We can get out on turn 1 and play the Ego Drain on turn 2 if we have it. But we can also play this if we don't have a fairy. We just have to exile something from our hand, which might be an extra land possibly, or something we don't need as urgently. We've also got Fairy Fencing, which gives an opponent's creature -X/-X until end of turn, depending on how much extra mana we pay. Or it can also get an additional -3/-3 if we control a fairy, so ideally we have a fairy out. And we have Spell Stutter, which is the same kind of thing. We need a fairy to make this better, but it's pretty much a make disappear by itself. 2 mana counter spell unless they pay 2, but they have to pay an additional 1 for each fairy we control. So the more fairies we have, the better with this one. And it can become a pretty hard counter once we have it. Got some other basic things here. Go for the Throat. Standard removal, probably the best removal spell in standard at the moment. And then let's go over the fairies. So we've got Fairy Dream Thief. 1 mana, 1/1 flying, which is okay by itself. It enters the battlefield and it surveils one. So we can put something into our graveyard if we want to, which does help this deck out. Sometimes we want things in the graveyard. And also when it dies, we can pay 3 if we want to, exile it from our graveyard, draw a card, and at the expense of losing a life, drawing extra cards as well, or for just 1 mana to start with. A really good creature to get us started off in the Fairy deck. We also have Obira, the Dreaming Duelist, a 2-mana 2/2. It's legendary. It's got flash as well, which really helps in a deck where you have lots of instant speed, fairy fencing, spell stutter, go for the throat. We want to have as much flash as possible to hold up those 2 mana so the opponent doesn't know what we're going to do. But yeah, so whenever another fairy enters the battlefield under our control, the opponent loses 1 life. So we have lots of fairies and they're cheap. They could do quite a bit of extra damage when we're bringing all those fairies out. We've also got Fairy Vandal, 2 mana, flash, 1/2. Flying, obviously, and whenever you draw your second card each turn, you put a +1 counter on it. The Fairy Vandal does tend to grow quite a bit. And then we have the Fairy Mastermind as well, 2 mana, 2/1 with flash and flying. And whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. If your opponent is about to draw their second card, you can play this out, you get a card for free. But also, you can just pay the 4 mana, its ability to make each player draw a card. You do that on the opponent's turn when they've already drawn a card. They'll draw their second, and you will draw 2. So you draw 1 from the ability and 1 from the trigger that the opponent has drawn their second card. And if you have a Fairy Vandal out at the same time, you're drawing 2 cards on a turn, so Fairy Vandal gets stronger as well. So these work really well together. But we've also got Consider, which you might have to cast on your own turn if you want to grow a Fairy Vandal, because that's drawing an extra card or your second card in a turn. You get to Surveil again, put something in the graveyard, which is really useful because we have Halo Forager, a 3/1 or 3 mana 3/1 fairy with flying, not flash this time, which is a shame. If it had flash, it'd be really, really good. But when it enters the battlefield, you can pay X additional mana. When you do, you can cast an instant or sorcery from the graveyard without paying any additional mana cost. It will be put into a graveyard, you exile it instead. So if this is coming out for 3 mana, we could pay 4 to gain access to another Consider, Ego Drain, or Fairy Fencing that's in the graveyard. If we pay 5, we can get this, well, it's not a spell starter because it's not instant speed, but we can get Go for the Throat if we pay 5. And if we pay 6, we can also get some card draw. So we have Thirst for Discovery and we have Quick Study in the deck. Quick Study is a new one from Eldraine. This is just draw 2 cards. And Thirst for Discovery is draw 3 cards. You might have to discard 2 unless you discard a basic land. So the fewer basic lands you have in the deck, the worse Thirst for Discovery gets. Maybe it's better just to Quick Study. But because we have Shieldred as well, being like the best black creature in the game, if we're drawing 3 cards and discarding them, that's 3 triggers for Shieldred gaining us life. We're going to gain 6 life. If we do a Quick Study, you're only gaining 4 life. So there's upsides and downsides to both of these. You might want to have both in your deck like this. If you don't have basic lands, you might cast a Quick Study. If you have an extra basic land, a Thirst for Discovery is strictly better. And obviously, Shieldred is going to drain your opponent when they're drawing cards, which you can do with the Fairy Mastermind. That does extra damage to them as well, and extra life gain for yourself. And yeah, most people kind of quit when the Shieldred comes out if they don't have a way of dealing with it, because it gains so much advantage every turn. When it's sat there on the battlefield, you're just going to keep winning more and more. They can't get rid of it. So we've got some of the rare lands as well, a bit of each because we have 1 mana spells of different colours. Some require both colours. We want them as early as possible. So the more rare lands, the better. But at the moment in this deck, we've got just 6 rare lands. We have 2 Shieldreds, and then we have 2 Fairy Masterminds, which is our budget of 10 rares or mythics. But in the optional upgrades, we have a couple of other fairies. We have Talion's Messenger, a 3 mana, 1/3 flying fairy. Whenever you attack with 1 or more fairies, you draw a card, and you discard a card. And when you do, you also get to add a +1 counter onto a fairy you control. So drawing the second card on your turn when you're attacking triggers Fairy Vandal. You can put another +1 counter on that or onto something else. So Talion's Messenger is a great way of growing that. It's a shame it's just a 1/3 by itself, but I guess it's more of a defensive kind of creature. But then if you're attacking with this and the opponent can't kill it, you can put +1 counters on itself as well. So that's going to keep growing each turn, so that's a really good one to include. And we also got Italian, the Kindly Lord, which I don't think is as good as Shieldred. Obviously, it's only really good in a deck where you benefit from that fairy advantage as well. And then we have Talion, the Kindly Lord. So it's 4 mana, 3/4 flying fairy. And when it enters, you get to choose a number between 1 and 10. And if the opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to that number, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. So this works really well if you have a Shieldred as well, because they're losing 2 life. They're losing life anyway from Shieldred. They lose 2 more life. You draw a card, which means you're gaining life. So you're making it so that the your opponent doesn't want to cast spells because they're losing and you're gaining from that. So it's a really good thing to have out. Probably would have Talion and Shieldred together rather than replacing Shieldred with Talion. But it's definitely a good one to try out in this kind of fairy synergy deck. And we have lots of other lands, which obviously you can include the blue and black rare lands from Kamigawa, and then the other 2-color Dimir lands. Now, the only other thing I'd recommend is maybe more fairy masterminds, because having 2 is good, but they're not legendary. So if your opponent draws a second card on their turn, you draw an extra card for each fairy mastermind you have out, which if you have 2 or 3 or 4, is going to be absolutely massive card advantage for you. So you can push through that damage in the air, you can drain them out with this Shieldred, and you can just frustrate them by removing their cards, killing their creatures, and countering whatever spells they try and cast later on. So that's how you're going to win with the budget fairies deck. And there's one more fairy you should actually include, which I forgot to include, but it's the Sleep Cursed Fairy, which I don't have yet. It's a 1 mana 3/3 flying ward 2. It comes in tapped with 3 stun counters on it, and you can pay 2 mana to remove a stun counter or untap it if there are no stun counters left on it. So it's something the opponent doesn't feel like they have to deal with immediately, and they can't really if you get it out early because of the ward 2. But also later on, you've probably got other threats to worry about. So having a 3/3 that's harder to remove is less likely to be a priority for the opponent. But being able to attack with it and then untap and kind of use that like vigilance is really useful as well, because you can do that at instant speed like the other counter spells and other fairies we have. So it all works really well with having 2 mana left over on the opponent's turn, because they don't know what you're going to do with it. So maybe replace some of the fairy dream thieves with some sleep curse fairies. Be a nice way to upgrade the deck as well. The next budget deck we're going to look at is the budget rats deck from Wilds of Eldraine. So the basic idea of this deck is getting out as many rat creatures as we can, and either attacking through with them, going too wide the opponent can't deal with them, or adding wicked roll tokens to them later on. But let's go through each one from the beginning. We've got Gnawing Vermin, 1 mana 1/1 when it dies. When it enters, they have to mill 2 cards, or you can mill 2 cards if you want to. When it dies, a creature on the opponent's side gets -1/-1. There may be something like a Thalia or something that's really annoying you can get rid of using this. We've also got Okiba, Reckoner Raid. So the opponent loses life, you gain life for a couple of turns, and then it becomes a 2/2 menace rat creature as well. So quite useful for attacking through. The menace is kind of annoying. We've got the Harried Spearguard, a 1/1 with haste. When it dies, it replaces itself with a rat token. We've got some removal here. Go for the throat. Lightning Strike for either removal or that last bit of damage if we need to do that to finish them off. We've got Lord Skitter's Butcher, which can either create another rat and sacrifice something to scry 2 and draw a card if we need to draw some extra things, or can give our creatures menace till end of turn if we need it to do that last bit of damage. So it's nice to have the versatility there of doing different things. We've got Voracious Vermin as well, 3 mana 2/1 rat that creates a rat token when it enters, and whenever another creature we control dies, we put a +1 counter on Voracious Vermin. And there's lots of things that we might want to, we don't care if it dies so much, so like the Vermin at the beginning, the Harried Spearguard dies, it gets replaced, so we don't mind so much. So there are different ways we can let creatures die and put +1 counters on the Vermin, and obviously Lord Skitter's Butcher can sacrifice a creature as well, which will put a +1 counter on Vermin if that's out already. We've got a trick of having Gnawing Crescendo, 3 mana instant. Creatures get +2/+0 till end of turn. and whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we create a 1/1 rat in its place. If we lose rat tokens, they don't replace themselves. If the Gnawing Vermin, the Spearguard, any other non-token creature dies, it will replace itself with another rat, which in the Harried Spearguard case means 2 rats. Then we've got Toten Tans, the Swarm Piper, 3 mana, 2/3 human warlock bard. When it or another non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 black rat. So mix that with Gnawing Crescendo, we're making lots of rats when things die. And we can also pay 2 for the ability of one of our target attacking rats gains Death Touch till end of turn. So knowing we have this on the battlefield, the opponent probably won't want to block any of our rats because we can give any of them Death Touch instant speed. So even if they're blocking with an Adeline or a Shieldred or something big, there's not much they're going to be able to do against that Death Touch. So that's a really good uncommon to have in the deck as well. And then when we've made as many rats as possible, we want to cast a Twisted Sewer Witch, a 5 mana, 3/4 human warlock. When it enters, it creates another rat token of its own. And then for each rat we control, so that's rat tokens and non-token rats, we create a Wicked Roll token attached to it, which gives them all +1/+1 until they die or the token's removed. Then the opponent loses an extra life. So if we have 5 rats out and we get 5 wicked tokens on them, when those wicked tokens go to the graveyard, the opponent loses another 5 life. So we get to drain them out quite a lot at the end. And especially having things like Lightning Strike to finish them off, it's going to help us quite a lot. Also, if we happen to cast 2 Twisted Sewer Witches, one will put all the wicked tokens on our rats. The second one will put new wicked rolls onto our rats, and the old ones will all go to the graveyard, so they will all do that damage as well. So Twisted Sewer Witch has the potential of coming out, doing 5, 6, 7 damage just by entering the battlefield effectively, because all those other wicked roll tokens go to the graveyard. So we're just going to go as wide as possible as we can with the rats, and potentially do that last bit of damage with Gnawing Crescendo to give them extra +2, Lightning Strike to finish off any last hit points, or the Wicked Roll tokens to drain the opponent out at the end. For the optional upgrades for the deck, we've got Lord Skitter, the Sewer King, the King of the Rats. And whenever another rat enters the battlefield under our control, we get to exile 1 target card from the opponent's graveyard. So this is great against the mono blue Djinn deck. This is good against any reanimator targets like Atraxos, Atalis, and so on, or things like Kami of Transience that can come back from the graveyard by itself. We can exile those things from the graveyard. We also get to make an extra rat token at the beginning of combat on our turn every turn. So that's removing something from the graveyard every turn as well. That's a lot of repeat value getting things out of the opponent's graveyard. But in addition to that, it's just making us go wider and wider with rats. So we've got enough to do that last bit of damage. We've also got the Red Cap Gutter Dweller, a 4 mana 3/3 goblin with Menace, which doesn't sound that great from the stats, but when it enters, it creates 2 rats, because everything in this deck makes rats. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, we can sacrifice another creature, probably a rat, and if we do, we can create a 1/1 counter to go onto the Red Cap Gutter Dweller itself, and we get to exile the top card of our library, and we can play that this turn. Not next turn, this turn. But yeah, so extra card advantage as well, and a use for all these rat tokens we're making. If we can't get through at the moment and we need to draw something else, then it's going to help us make the red cap bigger and draw extra cards effectively that we can use to finish things off. And then we've also got Song of Totem Fans. So this is really useful. We can play it just for 1 red to give all of our creatures haste if we need to. If we've made loads of rats for different reasons, we want to give things haste and just do that damage straight away, we can do that. Or we can wait later on and pay an additional X to create an additional X 1/1 rat tokens. So we can go super wide with this and make loads and loads of rats, which if we have a Twisted Sewer Witch is going to help us do loads of damage at the end. The other upgrades, the rare lands from Kamigawa, like always, and then any other 2-color lands if we can afford them, because there's no particular reason to have basics in the deck if we can have these rare lands as well. At the moment, I've only got the 4 rare lands here, and no other rares currently in the deck. So technically this is a really, really cheap, could be artisan deck if you just have basics in there. It might make some of these things a little bit trickier to cast at the beginning. That's all to say about the rats. Let's go on to the next deck. And this one is using all kinds of food synergies in green and black or Golgari colors to do lots of life gain, do ramp, and to do extra damage. Can basically pretty much do anything. Oh, and card draw as well. So loads of things we can do with our food tokens. So going through all the cards from the beginning, we have Gingerbrute, a 1 mana 1/1 artifact food creature. It has haste and it can't be blocked except by creatures with haste this turn. If we pay the 1 mana, you have to be fast to catch him, right? So you have to have haste. You can also tap him, pay 2, and gain 3 life because it's food as well, so you can just eat him if you need to. But having something that can be unblockable might be really useful in this deck. We've also got, removal. We've got Go for the Throat, like normal. We've got Shieldred's Edict if we have Planeswalkers to deal with, or something with Ward that we want to sacrifice. We also have the Witch's Vanity to remove things. Destroy something that has mana value 2 or less. Any small annoying things, Skrell, Thalia, I don't know. Any small annoying things like that, or Evolved Sleeper. Whatever they might have that's cheap and annoying, get rid of that with Witch's Vanity. Chapter 2, we create a food token. Chapter 3, we create a Wicked Roll token, which gives one of our creatures +1/+1, and the opponent loses life when that aura goes to the graveyard. It's nice just to make one of our creatures bigger. We've also got Minstrosity, 2 mana, 3/1 creature. When it dies, you create a food token. It's good to get it down early and start putting some pressure on the opponent, but also it trades pretty well because it has 3 power, so it can take out something with 3 toughness that's attacking you. So it can kind of put them off a little bit, and at the very least it makes that food token that we really want to have. We've got Tough Cookie, 2 mana, 2/2. When it enters, create another food token. And for 3 mana, we can make a food token or some other non-creature artifact into a 4/4 artifact creature just for that turn. So to push through some damage, or we can do that as instant speed on the opponent's turn when they're attacking to block by surprise. And of course, we can eat the Tough Cookie, 2 mana, tap it, gain 3 life. We've got Welcome to Sweet Tooth. Create the 1/1 human, which is good for bargaining, which we don't really have in this deck. But hey, it's a blocker at the very least. We can create a food token on Chapter 2 and on Chapter 3. This is where all the food comes in really handy. We can put X +1/+1 counters on a creature we control, where X is 1 plus the number of foods we control. At the very least 1. If we have other foods, it's going to be more. So Tough Cookie is a food. We have loads of food tokens made elsewhere. Gingerbrute is a food. And our next card is also a food, 3 bowls of porridge. So there's lots of food we can have. We could put lots of +1 counters on something. And if we can put all those +1 counters on Gingerbrute, we have an unblockable creature that can do 5, 6, 7 damage if the opponent doesn't have something with haste to block it. So that's a really good way of getting some of that damage through. So 3 bowls of porridge was the last card we were at. And I love the design of this card. It's actually really useful. I've used it in lots of draft games. It's 2 mana to put it out, and you can pay 2 mana and tap it and do one of these 3 different things. Now, the genius of the design of this card is that each of these bowls, if you know the story, we've got one that's too hot. That's the first effect of the card. It can do 2 damage to target creature because it gets burned. We have one bowl of porridge that's too cold, which can tap a target creature because that's a kind of cold, icy effect that ice creatures tend to have in Magic. And then we have third bowl, which we can sacrifice, eat, gain 3 life. That's the bowl that's just right. I love the fact that the design of that card. Really useful because it can do all kinds of things. It can even ramp us. You'll find out why in a minute. We've got Glissa because it's a black and green deck, and Glissa is awesome. Having a first strike death touch creature means that the opponent can't really attack you with anything unless they want to lose it. So great on defense, but also on attacking because they don't really want to block. And if it does do damage to the opponent, you can draw a card and lose a life, or you can destroy an enchantment, or you can remove 3 counters from a permanent, which could be from a saga if you want to kind of reset the saga. If you've got the Witch's Vanity or Welcome to Sweet Tooth on Chapter 2, you can remove some of those counters and go back to Chapter 1 on our next turn. Or you can use this to get rid of an opponent's Planeswalker or anything else with +1 counters on it. So all kinds of things you can do with Glissa. She's awesome. We've only got 2 of her in the deck because she's rare, and we're trying to keep back on the rare cards for this deck. But also, we want to have Greta in there as well. Sweet Tooth Scourge, which is also same cost, 3 mana, 3/3. It doesn't have First Strike and Death Touch and all those other things, but she does make a food token, which is going to help us do various things. We can pay a green to sacrifice a food to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, which can help grow the Gingerbrute or something else. And we can pay 2 mana, so 1 and a black, sacrifice a food, draw a card, and we lose a life as a consequence of that. So there's all kinds of things we can do with food, and that doesn't have to be like a food token, like the food token it makes. It could be anything that's food, so Gingerbrute, 3 bowls of porridge, tough cookie, anything else that is also food, we can get these things from as well. So if the opponent's trying to kill Gingerbrute, we can possibly sacrifice it instant speed, draw a card, and we lose 1 life. But we get that benefit from the creature rather than it just dying. So the things Greta can do with food are pretty cool. This set is also cool, so we've got both of them. We've got Shieldred because there's black in the deck, and Shieldred is Shieldred. And then we have the other 2 pieces of food synergy. Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. This is going to help us finish the game off. 4 mana. Makes a food token, obviously, because everything does. It gives food tokens, or any foods we have, so even Gingerbrute, Tough Cookie, 3 bowls of porridge, gives them the ability to tap for green. So now we have all the green mana we ever need, and with our other lands, effectively all the mana we need to cast anything. And then we can also pay 7 mana to sacrifice this enchantment. Give our creatures +X/+X, where X is the number of foods we control, which includes the creatures and the bowls of porridge and all the other tokens. And that's going to make our creatures absolutely huge, hopefully. It's only sorcery speed, so we need to do that first, or on the turn that we want to do the damage. And then hopefully, if we have a Provisions Merchant out as well, a 4 mana, 3/3 Beast Peasant creature. It makes the food token when it enters, but also when it attacks, you can sacrifice a food, and if you do, you can give all of your attacking creatures +1/+1 and trample till end of turn. So ideally, we give them a huge boost from Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, or maybe Welcome to Sweet Tooth, give something lots of +1 counters, and we can give +1/+1 and trample by sacrificing food. We have all kinds of food we can sacrifice to do that. Also, one reason why we have Shieldred and Glissa in the deck is because they have Death Touch. Now, if you don't know, Death Touch and Trample is absolutely amazing together. Because if your opponent blocks with a Flesh Gorger or an Atali, anything that's big that you kind of either don't want to do damage to or it's going to block a lot of the damage, Death Touch and Trample will mean you only do as much damage to the creature as you need to kill it. That's technically what Trample does. Normally, if you have a 7/7 that's blocking, you need to do 7 damage to it to be able to kill it. But if you have Death Touch and Trample, then technically, even 1 damage will kill the creature. So if there's a 7/7 that's blocking, it will do 1 damage to that creature will die, and the remaining damage will hit the opponent's life. So it's a great combo between having Knight of the Sweet's Revenge and Provisions Merchant and anything else with Death Touch, because it's going to get loads and loads of damage through, even if they block with loads of creatures, or 1 really massive creature, you're still going to get loads of damage through with that. And obviously, if you have the 1 to pay for the Gingerbrute, then it can't be blocked, so, unless they've got haste, so that's going to get loads of damage through as well. Also, a tiny side note for things like Gingerbrute, if you've made it bigger, because it's an artifact creature, then the opponent can't get it with a Go for the Throat because it only kills non-artifacts. So if you happen to make it big enough that it avoids cut down, and you have other creatures to sacrifice to an Edict if the opponent has it, then a lot of the main removal they'll probably have won't be very effective against it. So not being able to block it, not being able to kill it, means it's going to get loads of damage through. We also have the rare land from Wilds of Eldraine, the creature land. So it can tap for black or green. You can pay 4, which if you have food tokens, creating mana for you is really easy. It becomes a 4/4 creature till end of turn. And when it attacks, you create another food token, which is going to really help. And you can exile something from the opponent's graveyard, or your own if you want to, but probably more likely to want to exile something from the opponent's graveyard. So again, additional damage, another attacker, more food tokens, and some graveyard control at the same time. And then in the optional upgrades for this deck, we have Mosswood Dread Knight, black and green creature, a 3/2 trample for 2 mana, which is good to start with, but when it dies, you can cast it as the adventure sorcery Dread Whispers. To draw a card, you lose a life, and then once you've cast that as the adventure, it goes back into that kind of exile pile where you can cast it again as the creature, so it keeps coming back. So again, great creature to have. You can put the +1 counters on it because it has the trample. The opponent wants to kill it, but they kind of don't because it just comes back anyway. That's a great creature to have. We've got Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender, which is really good if the opponent has Planeswalkers. If they don't, then it doesn't have Trample, Hexproof, and Haste. So it's really nice if they do have one. But yeah, if they don't, if they have one, you'll probably try and kill it quickly anyway. So kind of awkward that it gets those abilities if there is a Planeswalker on the opponent's side. But assuming there isn't, at the very least, it's a 3/1 creature, which is no different to Minstrosity for 2 mana. But whenever another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1 counter on it and scry 1. So it gets to grow, which is nice. Basically, when we sacrifice food tokens, it gets to grow. And also, I mean, the scry is useful in itself. And we can also eat Sir Ginger if we want to, and we gain life equal to its power. So not just 3, which is what it starts out as. If it's grown pretty big, we're going to gain more life by eating Sir Ginger if we need to. So I'm not entirely convinced on this card, but it's probably an upgrade from having Minstrosity because it covers the fact that the food token that Minstrosity makes because it's food in itself, and it's a 3/1, so you could swap those in if you have it. Try that one out. We've also got Gix's Command because if the opponent has lots of little creatures, we're going to want to have to deal with those. Get rid of them. We could put 2 +1 counters and lifelink on something like the Ginger Brute, which is nice to bring it out of cut down range. We can return things from our graveyard to our hand, which is useful because the opponent probably wants to get rid of Glisser and Shield Red as soon as possible. And even the Ginger Brute, we want to get that back into our hand to cast it again. And we can make the opponent sacrifice their biggest thing, which tends to be the thing that causes us problems. So Gix's Command covers all kinds of things. 5 mana, which isn't loads, but obviously having food that can tap for mana is going to help us cast lots of things in one go. And we could possibly do that and various other things on one turn. So that's going to be really useful to get through the opponent's blockers, to stop them from killing us. And most of the things we have more than 2 power anyway, apart from like Tough Cookie, but we can put +1 counters on things, so we can make it bigger. So we can use it as pretty much a one-sided board wipe as well. And then we've got the rare lands, of course. The slow lands that come in tapped if they're the first 2, untapped if it's any time after that, and then Llanowar Waste that do damage to us. We have so much life gain with the food tokens and Shield Red that it really doesn't matter. So that's the Golgari food deck. Let me know what you think of that one in the comments below. And let's go on to our last deck. The last deck we have is the Boros Nalaar deck. Now this is a budget version of a deck that I've been using for a while, and also one you might have seen recently because it, I don't know, someone won something with it or whatever. It's just suddenly become a popular deck that everyone's talking about. Nalaar is a 2 mana creature that can create Thopters with haste whenever we play lands from exile or cast a spell from exile. So everything in this deck is looking at drawing extra cards, casting things from exile, making lots of Thopters. So we have things like Cheeky House Mouse, which can be cast as the adventure, and if it does, the creature goes to an exile zone, and we can then play out the mouse from exile, which triggers Pia. We've got Skrelv to protect Pia because we really want to keep her around once she's out. We've got Monastery Swiftspear because we're going to be casting lots of spells on various turns. So we want to be able to use that as an extra threat to get through. It's going to grow pretty big. Play with Fire to pick off the opponent's creatures or do damage and scry. We've got Invasion of Gobakhan to look at the opponent's hand, exile something, make it cost 2 more. And also the Light Shield Array is really, really useful if we can flip this. And we can use Play with Fire, we can use Lightning Strike, we can use Volcanic Spite to do 3 damage to a battle. So we can flip Gobakhan relatively easily, or we can use Thopters, because all we need are 3 Thopters in the air to hit Gobakhan to flip it over. And then it becomes the Light Shield Array. All of our creatures that have attack that turn get +1/+1 counters added onto them, and we can sacrifice the Light Shield Array to give everything hexproof and indestructible to the end of turn. So things are going to keep growing. It's still there. If they try and get rid of something, we can make everything hexproof and indestructible. So protection on everything, basically. Also, when you flip Gobakhan into the Light Shield Array, we are casting the Light Shield Array enchantment from exile, so that also triggers Pia again. We've got Kellen's Light Blades as a way to slow the opponent down. It's kind of like Elspeth's Smite, doing 3 damage, but we can also bargain with this, and we can sacrifice most likely a Thopter, because that's tokens, and we can destroy attacking or blocking creatures. So even if it's Atraxa, Atali, big things like that, we can kill them with Kellen's Light Blades, and we couldn't do that with Elspeth's Smite. So it's pretty useful removal. Lightning Strike, yes. Volcanic Spite. We have Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve, which are the same cards with different names. Have 4 copies of each. They exile the top 2 cards of our library until the end of our next turn. We can play those cards. So all those exiled cards are going to help Pia create loads and loads of Thopters. And there's lots of virtual card advantage. We can get lands from there as well. So we could cast Ren's Resolve, get a land, get, I don't know, another Ren's Resolve, cast that again. We're going to have loads of things that we can cast that are going to get Pia making Thopters. And if we haven't got Pia to start with, we can find her by casting all these exile card spells. And then we've also got Witchstalker Frenzy, because the opponent might have something we need to get rid of, do 5 damage to. And this is almost always going to be just 1 mana, because we're always attacking with lots of Thopters. Or if the opponent's attacking us, we can get rid of it as well. So yeah, great removal spell to have in there. Shame we can't hit battles with it or the player's face, but you know, getting rid of creatures is important too. We've got a very, very low curve with this deck. Like everything's pretty much 1 or 2 mana. So we've got, so we haven't got that many lands, but also we're using the Cabaretti Courtyard to get mountains or plains out of our library and thin the deck out. So the more spells we're finding with our Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve, so we can just keep casting loads and loads of cheap things as quickly as possible. It's going to help the Swift Spear. It's going to help Pia make loads of Thopters. So that's a really simple deck. Just want to make loads of Thopters and keep attacking with them, and they get bigger because of Gobakhan. Gobakhan can get rid of things like Sunfall, Farewell, whatever the opponent has that we really don't like. So yeah, and Pia doesn't even need to attack. She can just make these Thopters attack for her. So it can be a really fast deck as well. Quite fun to play. There's a few different options we have in the upgrades here. We have things like Heartflame Duelist. Anything with adventure is good, because when you cast the creature, if you've cast the adventure already, the creature is coming from exile. So we can do 3 damage to any target. Then we have the Heartflame Duelist that gives our Play with Fire Lightning Strikes and Reckless and the Volcanic Spites have lifelink. That's going to keep us going a bit longer. Then we've got the Pollen Shield Hair. Now this has green if you want to cast it as a sorcery, so we can include green in the deck if we want to. It makes it a bit harder mana-wise, but we don't have to cast it as the adventure. We can just cast it as a 2-mana 2/2 creature that gives our tokens +1/+1. It's a way of just doing extra damage with all those Thopter tokens. We've got Soul Partition, which is a pretty good removal spell. You might want to use it maybe in place of Kellen's Light Blades, because for 2 mana we can just remove anything, get it off the board and make it harder to cast next time. Or if we really want to, this is the versatility of Soul Partition, we could cast Soul Partition on something of our own. So I don't know, maybe a Swift Spear, so we can cast it again from exile, or a cheeky House Mouse, so we can cast the sorcery and the creature, both from exile, or we can do it on a Golgari, bring that back to our hand, cast it again to exile something else from the opponent's hand as well. So there's lots of things we could do with Soul Partition. We could even like use it to protect Pia if there's a board wipe and we want to bring her back and play her out next turn. So really versatile spell, Soul Partition. Okay, so we've got that. We've got Questing Druid, which again, if you want to include green, then this is going to work out pretty well. It's also got Instant Adventure, which exiles top 2 of your library until your next end step. You may play those cards. So pretty much the same as a Reckless Impulse or Ren's Resolve, except for this has to be played by the end of your current turn, or if you're doing this as an instant on your opponent's turn, then you have your next turn that comes up, you only have that turn to play them. So most of the time you don't want to cast this on your own turn, because then you only have that turn to be able to cast the spells from exile. It's much better to do it on your opponent's turn if you can. Which also, if you've got this from a Reckless Impulse or Ren's Resolve, then at instant speed you're making another Thopter as a blocker or whatever you might need. We've got Erebras, which I really like in this deck. If you want to go this way with the deck, then you want as many spells as possible. Obviously, we have lots of spells that just draw more cards, or exile more cards to play them. So we can pretty easily use this creature, which is, I mean, it's a 4-mana, 4/4 first strike, which is pretty good anyway. It blocks things like Adelines and, well, anything with 4 toughness pretty easily. But when you cast an instant or sorcery, it does 1 damage to the opponent, and you add another red mana. So it kind of pays for itself. You could just cast one play with fire after another. You could cast Reckless Impulse and get extra mana to cast the things you find off the Reckless Impulse. And if you happen to cast 3 in a turn, you can then pay 1 red mana, which you would have got from casting the last spell, so you always have it. And you can flip Erebras over to the Great Work, do 3 damage to the opponent and each of their creatures, which might well kill everything if they have a small creature deck. You then create 3 treasure tokens on your next turn, and then on the third turn, it flips back to Erebras again, but you also get the ability to cast instants and sorceries from any graveyard. So you can cast your opponent's instants and sorceries, which is really cool. They're not exiled, so it's not anything that extra gives you extra triggers off Pia, but it's just a really awesome thing to do when you have so much card draw and red spells in a deck. And when you're casting these things from the graveyards again, using the treasure tokens to cast the opponent's things if they're off color, you can again flip Harabrask just by casting 3 of those, and then it goes round again. So great way to remove the opponent's creatures and possibly just do the extra damage you need to finish them off. We've also got Virtue of Loyalty, which is in other kind of big expensive versions of the deck. It's a 5-mana enchantment, but you don't have to worry about the cost of the enchantment if you're exiling it with Reckless Impulse or Ren's Resolve, because you can cast it as the adventure, which is only 2 mana to create a 2/2 Knight creature token with Vigilance, which will then exile Virtue of Loyalty, where you can cast it from exile again, so pretty much 2 triggers off Nalaar again, and then you can give all your creatures +1/+1 a counter on them, and untap them at the end of your turn every turn, which is kind of like flipping Golgari, but Golgari gives you the hexproof and indestructible if you need it, and Virtue of Loyalty gives you effective vigilance as well, which is really cool. You untap your creatures, so if you attack with everything, you then have lots of blockers that are much stronger. But also, when you have things like Skrelv, you can tap Skrelv to protect Pia, and then you can untap Skrelv with Virtue of Loyalty at the end of your end step, and then you have Skrelv available again to protect. So that works really well, but it's a mythic. So if you have it, I'd include it. If you don't, try the budget version. And we've got all the other rare lands, again, like normal. We've also got the rare creature lands from Wilds of Eldraine, which can turn into a 2/2 creature and can put a +1 counter on something else when it attacks. And we have a couple of other things that we could include. Fateful Absence is a rare which is good removal to get rid of planeswalkers and creatures. And it does give the opponent clue tokens they can pay to sacrifice that and draw a card, which isn't great. If you really need to, you could even do Fateful Absence on maybe one of your own Thopters or something that's about to die anyway. And then that gives you the clue token, so you can then sacrifice it and draw a card if you need to. That's kind of versatile. And also we have Virtue of Courage, which I think would be a really cool thing to add to the deck if you have it. Just like Virtue of Loyalty, you can cast it as the instant, first of all, if you need to, where it does 2 damage to any target. But if you get to the point where you can cast it for the 5 mana, whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you can exile that many cards from the top of your library and play those cards this turn, not next turn. Works really well with Urabrask because you're creating extra mana when you're casting things. You want to exile more cards off the top of your library to be able to cast more things. Also, obviously, with Pia, you're exiling things off the top of your library. You're creating lots more Thopters. So you can go through lots of cards really quickly, but that's only non-combat damage. So that's only like Play with Fire, Lightning Strike, things that hit the opponent's face rather than just attacking with the Thopters. But also, like I said, Urabrask's 1 damage is non-combat damage whenever you cast any other instant or sorcery. So Virtue of Courage works really well with him. So there's lots of options there to upgrade this relatively simple red and white deck to include possibly green, lots of other rares and mythics as well. So this deck is actually a really fun one to play with, and the obviously there's a really popular version as well going around. So it's probably quite an effective deck. So the only thing is Pia is very specific and pretty much only works in a Pia Nalaar deck. If you don't have Pia, you might not want to use 4 rare wildcards on crafting 4 of her. If you have her anyway, and if you have the wildcards, then I think this is one that's going to be pretty useful as time goes on. There's going to be all kinds of other red and white small low-cost spells that might be able to reinvent this deck as time goes on and more things come out over the next year or two. So that's the last deck. Let me know what you think about all of these in the comments below, and I hope they're all helpful for you. So if you have lots of cards from Wilds of Eldraine and you don't know where to use them, here's some ideas of what you can do with them. There are lots of other budget decks I could mention, but I don't want this video to go on for hours and hours. So that's all we've got for now. Yeah, let me know in the comments which one you think is the best, which one, if you've tried any, let me know all those things. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any future videos. And thank you for watching this one to the end. I will see you in the next one.